Good afternoon. My name is Kelly Vlahos. I'm the managing editor of the American Conservative. Thank you for joining us for our very first special webcast on the anniversary of 9/11, the attacks on New York City and Washington, D.C. As you know, the American Conservative was launched in 2002 in response to the drumbeat to war in Iraq. They were the first conservative response to what turned out to be the global war on terror and the Bush war doctrine, the preemptive war doctrine. So we're very proud of our magazine. Unfortunately, we've been right about most things in the war and the post 9/11 aftermath. I've been writing for the American Conservative since 2007. Like others, it gave me a space to write and criticize what we saw at the national security state here and the drumbeat for war abroad. Joining are two people, soon to be three, who have also been quite heavily involved in the national security state internally and also in the role of critic and activist. So please let me introduce you first to John Kiriakou, who's a former CIA agent. If you don't know already, he spoke very vocally out against waterboarding and was punished by the government, actually did 2 years in prison for leaking classified information. After getting out of prison, he's been in support of whistleblowing, government whistleblowers, and against many of the national security state policies of the United States. He's here to talk to us about a little bit about how the national security state has hurt the American people, which is an interesting angle post 9/11. Also joining us is author and journalist Scott Horton, who you may know from the Scott Horton Show. He also Anti-War Radio, and he's the managing director of the Libertarian Institute. And he has just published a wonderful, comprehensive volume, a book on Afghanistan and the policies of the last 15 years of war in Afghanistan. So without further ado, since we have limited time, we're also waiting for Gareth Porter. I'd like to turn to John and talk to you a little bit about, you've seen the government response to 9/11 on both ends, the war on terror abroad, as well as what the government does to people who question its policies. Can you talk a little bit about the surveillance state, or not just the surveillance state, but the national security state, and how it hurts Americans in the wake of 9/11?
Yeah, thank you, first of all, for having me, Kelly. I love the American. I'm happy to be here. This is something that I think all Americans ought to be talking about, and we're not. In the immediate aftermath of 9/11, we saw national unity that was unprecedented, probably since the advent of the Second World War, maybe even the Korean War. And we willingly began to give up our civil liberties without so much as a public debate. Immediate aftermath of 9/11, I suppose that was to be expected, but I think nobody expected this to be a 16-year-long war so far. I think no one expected these suspensions of many of our civil liberties to have been permanent or semi-permanent. And I don't think anybody expected us to permanent wartime economy. I said in a piece published today in reader-supported news that suffer through longer airport lines or tougher security at airports. I don't mind concrete pillars around government buildings. What I do mind, though, is a torture program. I mind extraordinary renditions. I mind a secret prison system of secret prisons and torture chambers that the CIA has set up around the world. What I also mind is the suspension of many of the liberties that are enshrined in the Constitution. We don't have to like Al-Qaeda's politics, but by God, they are due the same legal protections that everybody in America is due. And if we are going to capture people in the name of national security, then we ought to charge them with a crime, put them on trial, and allow them to face their accusers in a court of law. And we just haven't seen that since the September 11th attacks. It's bad for America. It's bad for Americans. To change immediately.
And maybe you have a different perspective, but from my point of view, there wasn't much difference between the Bush administration and the Obama administration on this issue. They gave great lip service to ending torture. There was the executive edict on ending torture, but did it really end? Or is all that going on, the
no.
black sites, the renditions?
And I think that's another important point that most Americans don't understand, is there really was no difference between the George W. Bush administration and the Obama administration. I'm on record as saying that I always thought that the Obama administration's foreign defense and intelligence policy was really nothing more than an extended policy. You know, you can pay lip service to ending torture with an executive order, but that can be undone with the stroke of a pen. And not only that, but Barack Obama ramped up the drone war more than I think anybody ever thought possible. He did nothing to end extraordinary renditions. And frankly, on torture and secret prisons, we just had to take his word for it.
You know, Scott, can we talk a little bit about the drone war? Because I know there, in most conversations about 9/11, we talk about how we went to war in Afghanistan and then this failed war policy in Iraq. But then there's this other war that's killed an unknown number of civilians and terrorists that we don't talk about too much, and that Obama actually ramped up, not scaled back. And I know you've done many interviews with people on this issue.
Sure. Well, I mean, they killed thousands of people in the drone war in Pakistan. They were targeting the last CIA, the last Al-Qaeda guys hanging out there with the Pakistani Taliban, the CIA was, with their drone war. And I guess they got them, but they also got a lot of innocent people and destroyed a lot of innocent people's lives as well. And then, I guess the second and third order effects of all that, I don't really know too many, other than some of the Pakistani Taliban that fled the drone war and the Pakistani army offensives under Obama's Pakistan wars in 2010. They are what we now call ISIS in Afghanistan. They're actually not international Arab terrorists at all. They're former Tariqi Taliban guys from Pakistan, who are basically refugees from Obama's Pakistan war, who came to Afghanistan and then broke off their group from the Taliban. And which of course gives the safe haven myth a whole new lease on life, that look, there are guys who call themselves ISIS there, so we can never leave. In Yemen, they paid off the dictator in order to allow the drone war there for years. And what happened was the dictator ended up using all the money and weapons to attack somebody else entirely, the group up in the north, the Houthis. And so the drone war, the CIA's drone war, made Al-Qaeda more and more powerful in Yemen. Jeremy Scahill wrote all about this, about the backfiring of the policy there. But then when the Arab Spring,
a great book.
The dictator, America threw him out, replaced him with a new guy, and he went off and took his army with him and made an alliance with his former enemies, the Houthis. They ended up taking the capital. And so for the last 2.5 years, America has been fighting, yes, still a drone war against Al-Qaeda there, but has also been fighting an entire war for Al-Qaeda in Yemen against their enemies, the Houthis, and the former Saleh government there. And then George Bush invaded Somalia, hired the Ethiopians to do it, Christmas 2006. And that took what was basically a collection of old men, the Islamic Courts Union, destroyed their government and replaced it with Al-Shabaab, which means the youth, the angry young militia. And so they've been at war then, for now 11 years and more. We have a drone war there, which I don't know how much worse it's making it, but it's certainly not solving the problem, and it certainly has killed innocent men, women, and children there. And then I don't even know the extent of the drone war in Libya. And then, of course, as you mentioned, Afghanistan and Iraq and Syria, they have drone wars of their own, even as subsets of the other major wars that are going on there, which include, military, boots on the ground, infantry on the ground, et cetera. But they also have drone wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and at least there have been some airstrikes in Libya. I'm not sure if those are drones or not.
Well, I mean, what's emerging here is that there's this national amnesia when it comes to what the mistakes have been in this global war on terror, this post 9/11 war policy. How much did either of you fear that we have just sort of moved on from these mistakes, like you mentioned, Scott, in Somalia or in Afghanistan, and have not learned our mistakes, and that we are at risk of repeating history? I mean, I know it's cliche to say, but it seems as though that us three have been writing and talking about these issues for a long time now, and yet nobody talks about torture or bringing those who tortured during the GWOT to justice anymore. It's not even an issue in the Congress. It's not even an issue in the White House. And in fact, we have a president who bragged that he was going to torture during his campaign. What's the risk here of just forgetting the last 15 years and like Vietnam, like we forgot the mistakes in Vietnam?
Yeah, well,
the risk. I'm sorry.
Oh,
go ahead, Scott.
Go ahead.
Please. No, go right ahead.
Oh, no. Yeah, really, this question is much more up your alley there, John, the torture and all that.
Oh, thank you. The problem, I think, is twofold. One, Americans are not up in arms over the drone war because so much of it is still secret. It's only intrepid reporters in the region who are even reporting back on these issues of civilians being killed in drone attacks. And even then, the coverage is so scant that it's almost impossible to really get a handle on how much this is happening. Secondly, its own people. And so on the rare occasions when government officials do talk about the drone program, they tout its successes. Oh, there hasn't been an external attack on the United States since 9/11. Well, that must be because of the drone program. Well, the truth of the matter is that the drone program is probably the most potent recruiting tool that foreign terrorist groups have. I can tell you that I did dozens of Al-Qaeda fighters in my CIA years. And to a man, they all said that they had no beef with the United States. They had no personal problem with the United States until we rocketed their villages with drones and we killed their cousin or their parents or their brother and sister or whatever it was. They were compelled to take up arms against the United States. So there are people in countries all over the region, not just the Middle East, but South Asia and the Horn of Africa, as Scott pointed out, that otherwise would never have had reason to take up arms against us and did so solely because of the drone program. So drones are one issue. The other issue is this, that because there are people in our government who are willing to bend or even break some of the rules. That's nonsense. We can be safe protecting the laws and the Constitution that we have in this country. In fact, George W. Bush and Barack Obama, and as you pointed out, Kelly, have all agreed that no one who broke the laws sold detainees in custody. No one will face justice. That's just a policy decision that was made.
And I know we have a limited time left, so I wanted to ask you, Scott, because I know you've interviewed so many people. I think it's like 4,500 people since you started doing your radio casts in 2003 about the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq and the national security state. And one of the things you and I have talked about is the entrenched Washington policy establishment this elite core of individuals who are both on the left and the right, who created the policy, that supported and promulgated it, who are still in Washington despite the draining of the swamp and all the promises by the Trump administration. Can you talk a little bit about how they're the ones that led us down this primrose path and continue to benefit both politically and even financially from this global war continued abroad?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, I think you're right that it's basically in Washington, D.C. is where all this consensus is. At the same time, I think the rest of the country is over it. And, you know, even on the right, the whole thing about, yeah, let's just go and kick Arab butt until we're done or whatever. They're pretty much over that even for years now. And I think, to me, the biggest lie underlying the entire war has been, as Harry Brown used to say, that history began on September 11th. Because just as Mr. Kiriakou says that when he interrogated these guys, they said, well, I fight you here because you're fighting me. That was the case before September 11th. They didn't start it. Ronald Reagan and Jimmy Carter before him built up this force, and then George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton stabbed them in the back and turned them into the enemies of the United States, bombing them. And we think of the 1990s as peacetime, but Bill Clinton bombed Iraq on average of every other day or every 3 days for 8 years from bases in Saudi Arabia. And he supported the Israeli apartheid dictatorship over the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza, and at the time also the occupation of southern Lebanon. And that's why they attacked us in the first place. That's why they attacked us all through the 90s. That's why they blew up the embassies in the Cole and Khobar Towers and the World Trade Center the first time. They're trying to provoke America into overdoing it to replicate the Ronald Reagan's war against the Russians, which bled them to bankruptcy and destroyed their empire. And so basically our government is taking advantage of the situation, of the tragedy of September 11, 2001, which is exactly what the enemy wanted them to do. And it's working in the sense of accomplishing their goals, radicalizing the region, destabilizing all of America's puppet dictatorships. They even provided the excuse. Michael Scheuer, the former CIA analyst, said Iraq was the hoped for but unexpected gift to bin Laden. So all the rest of the wars are also just the icing on the cake for that. So that, to me, is the most important lesson of this, is that it doesn't mean that they're the good guys. Just because we're the empire, that doesn't make them Han and Leia. They're still butchers of civilians. But it is true that America is the world empire, and terrorism is a side effect of that rather than the reason for it.
Well, we have to say goodbye to John because John has his own special radio broadcast to launch within like a minute. So I want to say thank you so much for joining us, John.
Thank you very much
in this hurried moment in your life, and I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you so much, and best of luck.
Have you on soon in other webcasts.
I look forward to it.
Okay, thank you. And Scott, I just want to plug give a second to plug your book, Scott. His new book, for Aaron, Time to End the War in Afghanistan, just came out last month and is available on Amazon. And Scott, can you tell us where we can hear you? I know we can hear you online, but I just want to make sure that we give a plug for your radio cast.
Sure. Well, I'm in LA on Sunday mornings on 90.7 FM KPFK, the Pacifica station there. And then I do interviews all week long, and I post them all at scotthorton.org. Oh, and also at the Libertarian Institute, libertarianinstitute.org. Oh, I lose you.
Great. And I'm sorry that we missed Gareth Porter. He was having some technical difficulties, but we promised to have Gareth on at a later date because we have so much to talk about. I know this webcasting probably a little disjointed to viewers out there because there's just so much, whether it be the drone war, the torture, the National Security Inc., the establishment, you know, the neoconservatives. We didn't even get to that yet. So I think that this just qualifies as just a starting point for further discussion. And I hope, Scott, you'll join us when we do these further discussions.
Of course. Thank you again for having me, Kelly.
Okay, thank you. And remember, you can always read us at www.amconmag.com or www.theamericanconservative.com, and check us out on Facebook and at Twitter at AmConMag. And if you don't already have a subscription, this is one of our inaugural editions, Iraq War Folly. We were right there at the beginning. So thank you for joining us. I'm Kelly Blahos with The American Conservative.